Welcome to the Soul Surgery Podcast. My name is Nikki Clinch and I am your host. I am a maturation facilitator, teacher and coach, integrative holistic health counselor, breathwork facilitator, and author. I am the founder of the Academy of Maturation Coaching, The Alchemy of Being, where I train as many people as I can to become powerful spaces for human beings to come home to their authentic truth. Maturation is a powerful evolutionary process of dissolving trauma, breaking free of stuck patterns, and growing and healing at the taproot. Growing out of who we thought we were from the stories led by our past conditioning in order to grow and evolve into who we were born to be. In this podcast, I will be sharing many different things with you, opening up the doorways to my coaching sessions where you can witness with your own eyes how trauma contaminates our reality and how we can dissolve it, heal it at the root, and rewrite the story of our lives, reclaiming our power and reminding each one of us that who we are is wholeness. I will be interviewing some of the world's most prominent teachers in spirituality, healing, transformation, and human evolvement, and sharing with you my own teachings and learnings along the way. And above all, sharing with you my heart. The purpose of this podcast is to remind each one of you who you really are, to open up the doorway to a new possibility, to a new paradigm, to healing, health, transformation, and our evolvement as individuals and a species. So I hope you enjoy today's episode. One thing that you can do for me, if you find this podcast useful and if you love it, please do subscribe. And if you feel called to, leave a review, because reviews really matter. They help to spread the word and help to spread this podcast to as many people as we can. And lastly, if you have any big aha moments, any shifts, any insights in any of these episodes, please do share it with me. Share with me which episode it was, where in the episode it happened, and how it has impacted you and your life. Because there is nothing more I love than hearing from you and hearing your healing. So without further ado, let's get going. I hope you enjoy today's episode on the Soul Surgery Podcast. Hi, Emmy, and welcome to the Soul Surgery Podcast. Thank you so much for coming on and sitting with me today. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me, Nikki.
So just set the scene for us, just so that we know, whereabouts are you right now? Where are you right now? And where are you in this space that you're speaking to us in?
So I'm at home with my kids in bed, my husband downstairs, probably watching some sport of some description. I'm in my kitchen, which is kind of like the hub of my home. I love it here. It's like my safe space. And I live in Brighton, which is by the sea in the UK.
I love Brighton.
I love it too. I moved out of the city a few years ago and kind of haven't looked back since.
And thank you for coming to sit with me at this time, because I'm in New Zealand and I'm completely upside down from where you are. So coming to sit with me at night when the kids have gone to bed, I know you're probably pretty tired. So I really appreciate that. How old are your babies?
I mean, they're not really babies anymore, although I call them my babies all the time. My eldest is 9 and my littlest is 3. And I have 2 girls.
Oh, 3 is still really little. My boy is turning 3 next week.
Oh, yeah. She was 3 at the end of June. And yeah, she still feels like such a baby.
It's such a gorgeous age, isn't it? Because they're really finding their voice. Your book is called Find Your True Voice. They're really finding their voice and they always have something to say about everything.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And my girls couldn't be more different. So kind of navigating, having one child and getting her to this point in her life stage and feeling like I've got it, I'm all over it. And then having another child who's a completely different character and being like, okay, this is a whole new experience, a whole new ball game. So It's been kind of fun getting to know her and seeing her kind of personality evolve. And yeah, it's been fun.
Beautiful. So before we go into speaking about surrender, I just would love to know a little bit more about you. How did you end up getting into the work that you do now?
So I think, honestly, the answer to that is that I was in a really codependent family system. And so I grew up in a very rescuer mode, and I was
Mm.
groomed to be in that mode by family members to wade in
Yeah.
and troubleshoot and rescue and put out fires all over the place. So my natural inclination was to become a therapist, to
Yeah.
do that as a job, to
Yeah.
go in and rescue people and take care of
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
And even in my clinical training, I didn't really gain the insight to recognize or see myself coming in that. So
Yeah.
it was only when I started to kind of do the work and read around, and sort of, it's one of the reasons I love your work and why I'm so interested, just seeking out other teachers through their stories. And I
Mm.
just really paid attention and listened to anybody who I kind of came into contact with. And I started to learn that there was a different narrative out there for how I was living my life, and how I'd been taught to work with people clinically just wasn't sitting very well. It didn't
Yeah.
flow. And I
Yeah.
recognized there were so many faults in how mental health was being approached. People weren't getting better.
Yeah.
And so through my kind of own healing, I began to really grow and recognize what had led me to make my life choices, and personally went through some massive challenges as well. And my career really evolved as a result of that and changed,
Yes. Yes.
which I'm
I
so grateful for.
There's so many things in that you said that are so important. People were having treatments, but they weren't getting better. It's just going,
Mm-hmm.
kind of staying in this place of sickness or illness or imbalance or unhappiness. And one of the things that I see so often, I train people to now hold spaces that I hold,
Mm-hmm.
and they're pretty deep spaces for people. And one of the hardest things that always takes the longest part, once you've learned the skill, once you've learned how to hold the space, is the part about boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
The part where you have to learn, and it takes time to not get entangled in wanting to save someone, and at the expense of your own energy and your own self and
Mm-hmm.
your own everything, that you get kind of lost in this service of wanting to help. And I this isn't something that we hear talked about often, is the codependent
Mm-hmm.
part. The wounded
Mm-hmm.
healer is what I call it. That's so important, isn't it, that we can help
Yeah.
others without losing ourselves.
It's so massively important. And I think more than just recognizing how important it is for your own well-being, I came to realize how disempowering it was for the people that I was trying to support. By whether that was a friend, a family member, or a client, it was so disempowering for me to try and rescue and to put them in a
Yeah.
place of victim.
Yeah.
And I didn't recognize, for me, being controlling was so much about being an abuser and being
Yeah.
somebody who tries to control another's behaviors for their own gain. And that had been my experience. And I didn't realize that as a result of growing up in a very volatile environment, I'd become very good at controlling. I'm really good at
Yes.
controlling people as a way of trying to protect myself and avoid conflict.
Yep.
And so by gaining that insight, I just gained so much more compassion for myself and my own experiences, and also for my clients. I just understood them with a depth of knowing that I just perhaps had never been able to access previously without that insight. And so it
Yes.
was a really incredible experience, and it really shaped how I then went on to treat people and build my clinic. I built a clinic when
Mhm.
I'm 41 now. So I set up the clinic 17 years ago.
Wow.
And at that time, everybody was kind of like, who's this young kid, and who does she think she is, kind of thing. And I didn't get any peer support at all from other professionals, because what I was doing was just seemed to be, I guess, a bit cavalier. But I
Yeah.
really believed that people and their stories were at the heart of what was going to heal people. rather than a clinical diagnosis or a kind of wrestling with a person on this with their symptoms. And that model has kind of shaped what's now the clinic all this time later.
Yeah. Good for you. Good for you for making a
Thanks.
stand for something that seemed impossible and nobody believed in. I
Yeah.
had the same at the beginning of my career. People would literally ask me, they were like, what we don't know what box to put you in. There's no box for what you do. And I remember my husband saying, you just keep being you and everyone else will catch up. And it's a hard thing to do because it can be lonely and it can be scary and being judged often, but you kind of just have to make a stand for something that you really trust and believe in. So well done. I'm so pleased that you did that.
Thank you.
You speak about something that I think is so important for everybody to hear is firstly, it's actually a very, very hard moment in your own healing process when you realize your own controlling behaviors, your own manipulative behaviors, the unconscious manipulation and I want to say this, all human beings, because it is the nature of survival, will try to find ways to control and manipulate. And it can be done with a big smile on your face, or it can be done in more obviously destructive ways, but it's really the same and it's coming from the same place. And when we see that in ourselves, it's not easy to face in yourself, but it takes such courage, and then the compassion is so important. And really seeing that, we do it not because we're bad, not because we're, wrong, but because we've been trying to survive as a child, trying to survive in a codependent family system.
Yeah, and I think that that insight into trauma and how we react to trauma and how we survive trauma, it frames our kind of worldview of ourselves and our own behaviors in a completely different way. And when we can begin to educate ourselves about that and gain that insight, then it allows for so much more self-compassion. Because for me, I was just stuck in such a shame-based mentality that kept me really lonely, really isolated, because I believe that there was something, I guess, inherently wrong with me at my core. And what I realized is that everybody I was working with felt the same way. And it didn't matter what their presenting issues were, whether it was addictions, eating disorders, depression, anxiety, it didn't matter. These pathologies that had been slapped on people as a diagnosis were just responses to trauma. And that actually, when we became kind of wise to that and we're able to separate ourselves and recognize that actually these are just tools. They're really destructive and some of them are really messy, but they're just tools that we've developed as a way of trying to cope. It stopped us being able to kind of put ourselves in such a shame-based place and allowed for way more compassion. And my experience was that when we talk about it, we all that shame is alleviated and there's comfort in sharing and
Absolutely. We have so many differences on the surface, but, when you've worked with enough people like you and I have, when you get past the differences, you realize, gosh, we really are all the same. We struggle with the same things. We feel the same things. We have the same needs, those deep human needs. And we've just been trying to survive. And it's such a liberating thing. I always say there's kind of 2 or even 3 versions of yourself. There's the one that you want the world to perceive you as, which will use all our energy to try and keep that jig up. And then there's the one that you don't want anyone to know about, like you were saying, that's where the shame comes. And then there's the one that who we really are beyond all of it. And it is such a journey to be able to start coming out of hiding with the first 2, which leads you home to who you truly are.
You're able to kind of connect with this integrated self, aren't you? And I think it's true. We're so taught to see the world in such a fractured way and to see the differences and to compare and to highlight all of those differences between all of us. But you're right, there's so many commonalities between us. And when we recognize that actually we're all connected through these common themes, it really does aid that sense of loneliness and this fear that we have that we're so different from one another. We're not really, we're the same. We all want the same things. And actually, so many of our needs are just so humble. They're just human needs. And being able to accept and embrace these parts of ourselves is, as you say, just such a massive relief. And honestly, now the clinical work that I've been doing for a long time now has just been framed by that. Just welcoming people in to this new perspective, this new way of viewing yourself and your behaviors, and not getting out of that place where you're having to white knuckle it, where you're just trying not to be unwell anymore, where you're trying not to act out anymore.
You're just managing something.
Go.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
Letting go of these behaviors and making them redundant. That's the goal.
Yeah, that's why my book is called Surrender, because it is literally like, what are we willing to release and let go of, the attachment to, and all the healing is beyond that. I say in my book, I was a drug addict and an alcoholic and a bulimic and all the isms. But really what was really killing me was the absolute lack of sense of self. It was the codependency that was killing me. It was the part where I would lose myself completely in everything else. And of course that's led from a place of trauma. And I believe that when you take away the kind of surface level things that most people will focus on, what I'm doing, the patterns that I'm acting out in, beneath it is this lack of sense of self, this disconnect from self.
Totally.
And that's where the healing begins, really, when you can get down to those roots.
Exactly. And I think those behaviors that you describe, whether, being in addictions, being in an eating disordered state, they make a lot of noise, those behaviors. Yeah. And
they take up a lot of attention.
And they make a real mess. And what they do is they don't just kind of distract us, I think, from what's really going on with us. They serve a purpose in doing that, certainly. But people don't see us then. They just see the mess. They just see the noise. And we're left feeling unseen and unheard. And part of what motivated me to do this work, what motivated me to write the book, was helping people to create a world where they can feel seen and heard, where they know how to get their needs met, that they no longer feel ashamed of their needs. And there is peace and surrender in that space, and an opportunity to let go of this need to control, to try and control your responses to things, how you're perceived by other people, and be in a more peaceful state of being.
I love that. I knew I wanted to sit with you, and now I understand why. we probably could talk for a long time, which is a good thing. So let's bring it back to you, because like we've been saying, the most healing way is to hear human story, not the diagnoses and or the conceptual understandings, but to hear the human story, because that's where we hear ourselves. That's where we hear the living of the life part. So the first thing I want to ask you is, when I say the word surrender, what does that really mean to you?
I think for me, it was just giving up the fight. I just fought. I was so in survival mindset for such a long time. And I was so tired of fighting. And there was a point where I just kind of held up my hands and was like, I give up. I give up. And I hear that language a lot with people trying to find their path to healing. I've just got to keep fighting, and I'm like, just give up. You're not going to win that battle. That unwell voice that's screaming at you in your head is always going to shout louder than you can. We've got to stop focusing on what we don't want and start focusing on what we do. And I'd spent a lifetime resisting everything that was, the realities that I'd grown up with, the pain that I was faced with, and just trying to continue to put one foot in front of the other. And I kind of held my hands up at a certain point and was like, I can't do it. It's done. I'm done. This isn't working anymore. And I need to do something differently. And so I'm going to focus everything I have on what I want to create more of, rather than trying to shift my focus off what I don't want, which is what I'd spent forever doing.
Yes.
So for me, when you were talking about that, that's what immediately comes to mind.
Yes. And of course,
Yeah.
by really going for what you want, which of course is very vulnerable and it's a risk, it's always a risk. It literally challenges the survival strategies and the survival ways of being. By going for what you want, you come face to face with all the things that have been blocking it and getting in the way
Mm-hmm.
of that. And so that's of course what you then have to keep facing and surrendering and facing and
Yeah.
surrendering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's facing yourself, isn't it? Coming face to face with yourself and being able to kind of stay there and not run away anymore. Just be like, right, I'm here. We're doing this. This is happening.
Yes.
And I just thought, I've spent however many years behaving in this way, and I know what that looks like. What if there's a chance, even if it's a small chance, that things could be different and that I could be happy? And it was that moment of clarity when I realized I'd been unhappy for most of my life. And as much as that sounds like a really depressing thought, and it is, there was something liberating in that moment too, of going, okay, so now what are you going to do?
Yeah.
And everything
Yeah.
from then changed.
So, what has been the biggest point of surrender in your life?
I think I mean, there are so many little moments and that where you have these kind of aha moments where I realized that I was going to respond differently. And some of them might seem really silly. I remember going on a date. I left my marriage when I was in a really abusive marriage. I left my marriage. But even that, my survival instinct got me out of that. I was able to carry on putting one foot in front of the other. And I started dating again. And I was on a date with this guy, and there were so many red flags. And he wasn't even a bad guy. I just saw what was going on. And I remember sitting there thinking, okay, you know what this is? Are we really doing this again? Are we really going through this again? And I remember having this kind of out of body experience where I just stood up, got my coat, got my bag, and just started walking out. And he was like, "Hey, where are you going?" I was like, I'm going. And this like weird, like slightly dramatic exit. But I just left there sort of shaking, and I couldn't believe what I'd done. And I realized I'd broken a pattern of a lifetime.
Yes.
I'd been on that date 100 times. I'd met that guy 100 times. And the fact that I had the courage to stand up and walk away, that there was something else firing that wasn't just survival. It was something in me that was going, it's time for something different. It's time for a change. We're not doing this anymore. And so it sounds so silly, maybe that moment of walking out of that bar or wherever I was, but for me, it just felt so significant.
Yes, that isn't silly. That is significant. I mean, I really identify personally, but what I also hear is that you weren't walking away from him. You were walking away from a way that you had been being in your life. You literally were saying no more, and in the same moment of saying no more, you were saying yes to something else, something unknown.
Yeah.
And that is such a pivotal moment, because it takes years to get to that moment where you finally choose something better for yourself, and you something more worthwhile for yourself, more worthy for yourself. And that, when you've been a codependent, that's a massive life-changing moment. It happens inside of you.
Yeah, it was so life-changing, and I was scared, and I wasn't sure I'd done the right thing, and I knew I'd done something different for the first time. And do you know what? A month later, I met my husband, and that was it. You just create this space in your life, and obviously there's a moment, and I see it with my clients all the time, where they let go of what was, and the new future hasn't quite arrived yet, and you're there in that moment having to hold your nerve.
Yes.
And not run backwards. It's a bit of a lonely space, that, letting go of the old and waiting for the new, and just holding your nerve, trusting it's going to come.
I call it the wilderness phase, because you've turned your back and you've said no to the one that you've been, but you have no idea who you're becoming. And it's like a lostness, and you just have to be able to stay and trust in that, because it's usually in those moments, in that phase, where we get pulled back into the old, because it's habitual, it's familiar, it's magnetic. And just being able to hold that that unknowing and trust in that space. Yeah. I mean, I wish that we didn't have to go through it, but it is something that, I mean, I haven't worked with anyone that hasn't had to go through that phase to be able to get to the new.
I think it's that point of surrender again, just giving yourself space to surrender to that and trust in something. It's so easy to go back to what's familiar, even when what's familiar hurts us, but actually just having the courage to just stick with it. And that's why I think for me, reaching for other teachers, whether it was like I loved John Bradshaw or Brené Brown or whoever it was that I took comfort in. You know, in those years, I just read everything I could and listened to everything that I could of other people who'd walked that path before me. And I just trusted that something better would emerge. And it did ultimately. And I think having gone through those experiences now, I'm sure the same for you, you know, when you know, and it gives you so much more confidence in being able to support those people who are just either beginning on that journey or, you know, in that beginning difficult bit, but it's all worth it. It's amazing when you kind of come through the other side.
Yes, and I really want the listeners to hear that it wasn't just the 3D patterns and behaviors and the 3D person that you were walking away from. Inside, there was an actual shift in consciousness happening. There was coming out of a blind spot happening, a shift in perception of yourself.
It's becoming conscious. It's becoming, it's literally an awakening. It's becoming awakened to your behaviors. And for me, it was like, prior to that was being in like almost like a permanent blackout where I was existing and behaving, but I wasn't conscious of my choices. And even when there was, and we have these, even when we don't think we do, those whispers that go, don't do that. Are you sure that's the right thing? Don't go down that. That looks a bit dangerous. Don't do that. We have that grace whispering, that guidance to us. And for whatever reason, we don't listen. And it's about tuning back in. And that's what's so empowering when people say, I don't trust myself. I've made all these terrible decisions. I can't even begin to think about trusting myself. And I always remind them that voice has been there. It may have been a whisper, but it's been there throughout. Yeah. And it's just tuning back in. But like I said, the other stuff makes all the noise and it makes the mess and the chaos. And it's easy to allow that to drown out that kind of voice of grace within you. And I think that's partly why I called the book Find Your True Voice, because for me it was about, there's something softer here for me to be guided by. It's not noisy and messy and demanding. It's gentle and it's loving and it's nurturing. And I think if I trust that, because I haven't before, if I can learn to trust that, I think everything might be okay.
Yes.
And it was.
And that fundamentally is what will lead you for the rest of your life. The relationship that you build with that, I say in Surrender, you know, really this process is a love story with yourself, because you'll discover that it is your own love that will heal you in the end. There are many amazing practices and there are tools and there's learning and there's things to processes to move through, but it always will come back to how you can trust yourself, how you can be with yourself, how can you hold space for yourself, and you know, the more that can just keep strengthening, the more solid our sense of self becomes, and then we don't get thrown around like a leaf in the wind in life, because life is can be messy.
Life is messy, and I think part of it is you learn to embrace that kind of and beginning to enjoy the ride a little bit. But so much of what I tell my clients and what I say in the book is that your relationship with yourself is a communication to the rest of the world about what you think you deserve and expect. And so when we treat ourselves badly, we're giving permission and we're inviting more of that into our lives. When you begin, even if it feels cringy, clunky, awkward, unfamiliar, to be kind to yourself, then that's what you're communicating to everybody else about what you think you deserve.
Yes.
You know, so many of my clients will be like in disbelief. How could you treat me this way? How could he have behaved in this way? I'm like, how do you treat yourself? What are you communicating to these people you're in relationship with about what you think you will tolerate or expect?
Yes. And that is the
and begin to
hardest
shift that
piece.
narrative.
Yes, the self-responsibility is the hardest piece, and it is the part that I think creates the most resistance. It's so much easier, well, it seems so much easier to blame, but really at the end of the day, what are we deciding for ourselves? What are we saying is okay or not okay? And that really, like, coming back to your moment of walking out of that relationship, that was the shift, as you decided that you were going to choose something better for yourself, not
Mm-hmm.
wait for him to
Yeah,
change or wait for the circumstance to change or wait for something else to be different. You were like, no.
absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd been in many abusive relationships, but it was me that had been in many abusive relationships. I was participating in that. I'd sought those things out. And it's painful taking responsibility and recognizing that you're the common thread there.
Yeah.
I was seeking something out to harm me in a way. And when I
Yes.
chose to stop doing that, things changed.
Yes. And I want to just share, I had exactly the same moment, literally
Mm.
exactly the same moment. I was in a really unhealthy, toxic relationship, very, very intense love, but also very, unhealthy, manipulative, abusive behaviors. And I'd had multiple versions of the same relationship before. And of course, they were all multiple different versions of me with my mother, which was just absolute perfect reenactment of the dynamics between me and my mother as a little girl. And I had the same moment. It was like 10 p.m. at night. He started kicking off again. And I stood there and I could feel the pull in me to want to go and change it or make it better or fix it. And something this time just shifted. And I stood up and I took a really deep breath and I saw myself. It was like I could see myself from the outside in of who I was being and what I wanted to go back in and continue. And something in me just said, no, no more, not no more from today. And I grabbed my bags and I got in the car and I drove off. And it felt like a dramatic moment.
Yeah.
I literally felt like a dramatic moment. I drove to my friend's house. I knocked on her door and I said, can I move in? As I was driving away, it literally felt like I was driving away from a really dark side of my life. And it felt like a moment of transformation in myself. And of course, by the way, to everyone listening, this isn't a guaranteed dating show, but yes, I met my husband 6 months later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so true though. You make yourself available for relationship and you create space and that's when things happen. And I think there is some sort of intervention constantly trying to kind of help us or shift our perspective on things. And it's only that being in that awakened state we start to become wise to it. I used to have this mantra that I used to tell myself, and it was basically like, I want to be I grew up with no money. I was like, I want to have money. I want to be healthy. I want to be thin. And I used to say it on repeat. And then one day I said, I want to have money. I want to be healthy. I want to be free. And it just came out of my mouth at the end. And I was like, what was that? Where did that come from? Hang on. I'm really invested in being super thin. I'm really invested in securing my life here. What is going on? And it was just, for me, again, just Grace, like rearing her head and trying to guide me. And these little moments.
Yes, I thank you for bringing that in. I actually speak about that a lot, and I want to just repeat it over and over again. There is a big difference between trying to feel better and being free. It is a big distinction. And most of us will spend a long time trying to find the next thing that will help us feel better, which will always be temporary. We'll eventually have to continue the search. But when we're ready to really choose freedom, that's a different ball game.
It's true. What you're seeking is seeking you. It's within you.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
One more thing I wanted to point out, which I think is really useful for people to hear, is, we really can't see what we can't see. And I know that sounds obvious, but we'll continue and continue, and we just can't see another way. We'll think that what we're doing is normal, and actually it's okay, even though it's clearly painful and
Mm-hmm.
destructive and abusive. And so it's important for people to know that for both sides, that when we see people who are in these behaviors, or see people who are not making changes, we can't see. We're in blind spots. We're completely blinded.
Mm-hmm.
I remember being an addict, and I remember, I finally went to see a therapist, and I was recommended to them, and I was told that they specialized in addiction. And I remember this moment so well, going, oh, well, I don't need someone who specializes in addiction. And I really, really believed that. I was 100%
Mm-hmm.
convinced that the way that I was living was normal. It's my normal. And I want to highlight this because often, people may my clients may beat themselves up because they didn't see it sooner, or why didn't they change it earlier?
Mm-hmm.
We can't see what we
Mm-hmm.
can't see until that moment, that internal moment of shifting consciousness, when we just
Yeah.
come out of a blind spot and your reality shifts. Suddenly you see things you couldn't see before. And the
Mm-hmm.
gift of that is that
Mm-hmm.
just keeps going. That's
Yeah.
never ending with life.
I think that unwell voice has some very kind of sneaky and covert ways of keeping us trapped in that place of shame. And I think on this, that's so familiar to me in that beginning of that journey, when people start to gain that insight and recognize how unwell they may have been, or how they didn't know what they perhaps have gained insight into today, they can really beat themselves up. And I think it's just another strategy that old unwell voice uses to keep us trapped in this place of really high
Survival.
criticism and self-sabotage. Yeah. And I think if we can be grateful for having that insight when we get it, because so many people go through a lifetime without it. But also just trusting that you are where you're meant to be at that exact moment. And these insights have come to you now because this is when you're meant to have them. And it is difficult to do. And I would wish that I had done things sooner. Of course, it's difficult not to have those thoughts, but to trust that actually you're exactly where you're meant to be, and
Absolutely.
to be present in that moment is such a gift.
Yes. So I would like to ask you, just because it's hard to ignore the significant challenges and changes that the last 18 months have presented to the entire of humanity. How
Mm-hmm.
how has the last 18 months been for you and your family?
I mean, it's been a really strange time. I'm always reminded of that Dickens quote of "It's been the best of times and the worst of times," and for me, that's so true. There's been moments that have just been absolutely magical, and I've gained like further insight into myself. Like the intimacy in my marriage is greater than ever, and time spent with my children's been incredible. But at the same time, I've missed people so desperately, and we've felt so isolated from people. I've seen close people, friends and family, really struggle, and felt very helpless to that. And I think, again, it's just that reminding of surrender. We're surrendering to what we can't control, trying to be true to ourselves, connect with our authentic selves. And for me, I'm so lucky because I'm in a position where I serve and I'm there for other people. And that is just the biggest gift to me. Whenever my clients are struggling and they're struggling to find a way forward, this is my advice to anybody in that moment, is to go serve, go be there for somebody who needs you. And everybody needs somebody, and we all need that love and care from somebody, whether it's a stranger or someone you know well. And so being in the very fortunate position of being able to work with people when they're in a vulnerable place has really helped me massively. And reminded me of the privileges that I have and how grateful I am for the life that I've created.
Yes. Oh, I couldn't agree more. With the gifts and the challenges of the last 18 months, knowing that I come here every day and I sit opposite a human being and, hold space for the shifts in their life. Every time I've come off a session, it has gifted me with the richness and the meaning of life, the value of life, and it's such a gift. When you speak about service, it reminds me of the early days for me. I went into 12 steps when I was 20, and I grew up in recovery. I'm 42 now. And at the beginning, it was just all about service. It was like, there's always someone who is in a worse position than you are. How can you be kind? How can you ask them how they are? Or what chairs can you put out today? Or can you stack up the books? Or can you make the tea? And it was just it's so simple, but it was just life-changing for me to start thinking that way, because I was so self-centered.
It's massively humbling. And you realize, I think, when somebody calls you to show up in the world in that way, it calls you to reflect on how you don't. Do you respond to that woman at the checkout till? Do you look the person who hands you your coffee in the eye? Like, are you treating these people as your equals? Are you giving them a few moments of your day to show some love and kindness? And if you're not, why not? Is there space in your world for that? Of course there is. And your life will be richer as a result of doing it. And I find ourselves, we get trapped, in this kind of defensive cage. I certainly did, where I was so resistant to connection. And being able to welcome that in a bit is a game changer.
And in our resistance from it, we put ourselves on an island, and we're the ones that really, and we long for belonging, but we keep creating disconnection, and that's just it's such a common factor of the human condition and suffering. But you look at the checkout person and you really look them in the eye, and you really take a moment to talk, and that can give you a moment of such empathy and compassion in yourself. And maybe you might walk home that day and feel kinder to yourself about yourself. It's
love breeds love. That's how it goes. I think for me, like so much of what motivates me now with my work and is how can I extend the offerings that I have with my clients, the people that come into the clinic. It's what motivated me to write a book. How can I take these learnings, these things that I've learned over the last nearly 20 years, and offer them out into the world to people who can, spend their days absorbing them and hopefully empowering themselves to live a different life.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, it's really wonderful to speak to you and to sit with you. Thank you so much. I just want to finish on one last question. If you, and it's always a kind of a difficult one, because to just bring everything that we value into one sentence, but if you could say one thing to someone who was repeating the same old, and they were wondering whether they can really have a better version, a better way to live, or a better experience of themselves in life, what would you say to them?
Oh gosh, I would just do you know that you are loved? Do you have any idea how loved you are, and how strong your soul needed to be to choose this life that you've led so far? Do you have any idea? And if you don't, let's introduce you to that beautiful part of yourself that you're not in connection to.
Yes.
And I'll show you.
That's so beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Emmy. Really enjoyed speaking with you, and I'm sure that the listeners are going to get so much from this. Emmy, tell us where everybody can find you.
So you can find Your True Voice. The book is available in the US and in Canada from Blackwell's, and it's on Amazon and Hive, and in all good bookshops. You can find me on Instagram. I try and respond to as many people. I have a lot of strangers asking questions on there that I try and respond to every week. And if you need any other resources in terms of mental health, or you want guidance on treatment, then you can contact the Recover Clinic. We have counsellors there who will offer free advice to anybody who's struggling with any kind of part of their journey and need a bit of guidance. And you can find me on my website, emmybrunner.com. There's a lot there. There's a lot going on. I'm trying to remember it all.
Yeah, but that's a good, beautiful, generous gift. So thank you so much, Emmy. I've loved speaking with you. This has been such a gift for me as well. Thank you.